Hello, ladies and gents, and today is going to be just a little appetizer for what's to come down the line. I'm going to work on a video that's much longer than this and has better quality, and stay tuned for that. But today, just something I'm very passionate about is my top 5 movies of all time. And in this list, the way it's going to go down is I also have a 6th movie on here, just for an honorable mention, because I think it does deserve to be on here. And yeah, let's just get right into it. So, my honorable mention is The Last Duel. The Last Duel is very underrated because it kind of is a swan song to Ridley Scott. Even though he's still alive, it's just he's never going to make a movie with this big of a budget, probably ever again. And I think it's on par with The Gladiator. In fact, I think it might be a little bit better because I think it just does the storytelling so well. The dialogue is so excellent, and I think the climax, which is what is really unique about this movie, is the climax kind of hits towards the end of the movie, and when it hits like a train. Because throughout the whole movie, you're seeing these 3 perspectives, and when you finally see them kind of diverge, and you kind of see them just at the same time interact with each other completely, all 3 of these characters they just blow up they're at their melting point. They kind of blow up with angst and, like I said, at their melting point. So it's a very great movie. It's very underrated because a lot of people hated this movie, and it bombed in the box office, which I think it just kind of shows how grim the movie theater really is now, because it kind of panders to a lot of Marvel movies. And like I said, I like Marvel movies, but there needs to come to a point where it needs to stop with the amount of, like, how much it takes over the movie theater. It's overbearing, And I'm not going to rant about that. I might make a separate video on that in the future, but I digress. This movie is still really good despite it bombing the box office, and I think it's one of his best movies. Probably up there with Blade Runner. So yeah. My actual 5th spot is Possession, and I recently watched this on Shudder, and this is what really made me like Shudder. Even though there's some hit or miss movies on there, Possession is one of the best underrated horror movies ever made. I think it's better than The Shining. I think in some areas it's even better than most horror movies. But there is a horror movie I have higher up on here for good reasons. But Possession is really good. I think Sam Neill does his best acting ever in this movie. He really portrays a broken father and husband very well. As well as it's one of the best divorce movies I've ever watched. It's very grim and realistic in some parts, but they managed to have a Stephen King element in this movie where they have something outlandish in it, yet it feels so familiar in some parts. It's really cool, and I love the Berlin aesthetic they have in it, because this was filmed in the 1980s, before the wall collapsed, the Berlin Wall, and it's just, wow, you can really tell how old this movie is, yet how beautiful it is with, like I said, the Berlin architecture. It's really beautiful, and it's a movie that you can never really recreate again, simply because of that time, and it's very beautiful. And even I forgot what his name is, Daniel Ray Lewis, his old wife is in this, his first wife, which is pretty cool. Daniel Day or Ray, I don't know his actual name. I don't watch any of his movies, but yeah, it's really good. So, and I highly recommend it if you have Shudder or anything like that. Now, my 3rd spot is Eyes Wide Shut. This movie isn't really horror, but it kind of combines a lot of satire and a lot of horror that we come to know of Stanley Kubrick. And this movie is very underrated because this is an actual swan song to a director, Stanley Kubrick. And even though he died halfway in this filming and the production, it's such a beautiful movie. I mean, the atmosphere is so great. The color palette is so beautiful. How they use lots of reds and blues. And just a lot of the art style is so beautiful. I love all, like, the lights. And the movie is very beautiful. And then it really portrays the idea of a sex cult really well, a really powerful one that has a lot of control, and maybe even has connections to Hollywood or something like that. It's really unique. And Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise are a match made in heaven in this movie, unlike their real life versions. But still a really good movie. And my 3rd spot is Casino. Casino, it would be first if it wasn't for another movie. And I think this movie is better in some regards when it comes to the first movie I have on this list. But I love this. I love the other one too much. And the first movie, which we will discuss in a bit, is the reason why I got in the film. And I want to pursue it, but I digress as well. Casino, it does everything so right. I mean, Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro are a real match made in heaven. Robert De Niro is just so good in this movie. He plays Ace, and he plays such a terrible dad and father so well, as well as just husband. And you really see a downward spiral with his marriage and how he just isn't the greatest father. And this is based off a true story, like the first movie I will talk about, and I'm hinting at heavily. And Casino just Joe Pesci is just so malicious in this movie. He is unforgivable with some of the things he does. He crushes a man's skull and he stabs someone like 10 times with a pencil, something that John Wick didn't even do during this time. It's just crazy. And I love the Vegas atmosphere. There's a reason why this movie inspired the music video Blinding Lights by The Weeknd. It's just so great with everything. And I just love the Vegas aesthetic, like I said, and that's why it's in the third spot. My second is The Shining. Even though I said I like Possession more in some regards, I still love The Shining because it's one of the first horror movies I've ever watched, and it's really good. I think Jack Nicholson is the reason why this movie is better than the book. I know Stephen King hates this movie, but everyone else loves it, and this is one of the few times where I think the movie is better than the book because of Jack Nicholson. I think his acting is so good. He really plays the crazy actor very well with his facial expressions and just how horrifying he is. And I don't condone how Stanley Kubrick really traumatized a lot of the actors with his directing style, because he would every scene you've watched in that movie was probably done over 100 times. And the thing is, Stanley Kubrick is the guy who's a perfectionist, and that can sometimes harm a lot of people mentally. But I still love this movie despite that, and it's one of the best horror movies ever made. Now, and what's funny, before I get to the first movie, The Shining and Possession were made in the same time too, which is really cool how my favorite horror movies were made basically in the early 80s. Despite the fact that most of the horror movies in the 80s were pretty trash in the mid 80s, but those two are exceptions. But let's get to the number one already. So number one is Goodfellas, obviously. This movie is literally the reason why I love movies so much. And I love how this story is also based off a true story like Casino. And I think Ray Liotta, rest in peace to him, by the way. It's tragic what happened to him. He plays Henry. He does it so well. This is definitely his best movie, the pinnacle of his career. And this is just a really good staple of the mob genre. It really propelled the mob genre back into the mainstream because with the failure of Godfather Part 3, we needed something new, and I think Goodfellas did it very well. And there weren't a lot of big mainstream mob movies in the 80s, despite like Scarface. But even then, it wasn't the best of movies. But I think Goodfellas it's such a solid movie. I love the cinematography. I love how there are actual mobsters in this movie because Martin Scorsese basically hired anyone who looked like a mobster in these restaurants he ate at. And it's just so cool. And Robert De Niro does a great job as Jimmy. Joe Pesci does a great job as Tommy, and I love how there's a Samuel L. Jackson cameo too. Not really a cameo; he wasn't big back then, but you can just see him at a very younger age, and it's just way cool. If you're a big fan of Samuel L. Jackson, and overall, this movie is just so solid. And I think it really discusses how grim the mob life really is for anyone who enters it. And it's really cool that Henry managed to get out alive and unscathed and the skin of his teeth. It's just really cool. And that's why it's number one. And I wanted to include Godfather in this list, but it's just not my favorite mob movie. I might get butchered in the comments for that, but it's just I love Goodfellas and Casino just way more. And overall, this is my top five list. What are your top five movies of all time? Let me know down in the comments. And peace out, guys.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.